So I'm talking about YAML a bit today. How many of you know YAML? Just a bit. Okay, great. So I wrote my first Perl code in 1998 after having learned Java at university, and then I knew where I belonged. So I really like Perl. And if I need to speak louder, please constantly remind me to do it, because... So can everybody hear me also in the back? Great. So I was hanging around Usenet, IRC, at Perlmonks and perlcommunity.de. And at the Perl QA Hackathon 2015, I met Ingi, who's one of the creators of YAML. And since then, we've been hacking together on Bash and Perl stuff. And I had been using YAML regularly, but really got into it in 2016. So what's YAML? It's a data serialization language. But in reality, it's also a configuration language. But let's first talk about JSON. You will see later why. So I guess everybody knows JSON, right? So you have arrays, objects, that's mappings, strings, numbers, null, and booleans. And strings always are enclosed in quotes. And that's really all you need to know, basically. What's not JSON? Can you have comments in JSON? No. You also cannot have trailing commas in JSON. That's really annoying. And you cannot have multiline strings. So here we compare the some three formats. So we have JSON, XML, and we have YAML here. Oh, sorry. So I agree that this is actually not as readable as it should be, the YAML part, because actually the keys should be highlighted too, I think. But I'm still working on the highlighter, so that should come in the future. So you have a mapping here, just key colon value, and you also can have lists. And this is a list of mappings, actually. You have an integer, you have a boolean, and you have null. So YAML is indentation based. You have sequences, mappings, strings, numbers, null, and booleans. You don't have to quote strings in most cases, but in doubt, you should rather use quotes. You have comments, and that's it? No. So you have multi-line strings, and you can actually have 4 ways of them. Do you know how to do multi-line strings? So you can actually have a block scalar, and these will be folded unless there is a new line, an empty line. This is another type of block scalar, and here you have a double quoted string. You can use escapes there, like \t for tab. And double quotes is the only place where you can use escapes. And then you also have single quotes. This will be also folded into one line unless we have an empty line between. So if you have...
Sorry, is dictation removed, like tabs?
Yeah, the spaces will be removed, except for the literal block scalar. This will keep any spaces in trailing spaces. So if you need something literal, you should use this one. Yeah. Simply ask me if you have questions.
All right.
Yeah. And then YAML can actually have multiple documents in one stream. So JSON, you just have one data structure, and in YAML you have multiple documents. So we have a mapping, and then there's a end of document, and here is the next document start. You have a list, and then you have just a simple scalar that starts on the same line as the document start. So here's an example of what I use for my command line framework upspec. So I'm testing sorry, testing the arguments I get for my command line tool. And I just apply some regexes to it and see if it works. So I don't write this data into my test file, but I use a YAML file, which makes it easier to adapt. So here you can see this is a list, a normal block style sequence, and here too. But you can also write this like this. So this is actually similar to JSON style. It's called flow style. And you can actually save a lot of space with it. If you have just a number of arguments that are quite short, you can use this syntax. And you don't have to use quotes there also. So, have you ever seen the syntax? Who knows this flow style syntax in YAML? Okay. So in fact, the JSON example I showed you at the beginning is actually valid YAML. So this just works. But if we remove the quotes, it looks like this. And we have comments and trailing commas and all that stuff we like. So JSON is YAML, but YAML is not JSON. It's not a strict superset of JSON. There are some cases where it's not working, but actually you should be fine with every JSON.
And now you make me curious.
Yeah. So YAML has a limitation of mapping keys actually, 1024 characters, and if it's longer, you have to make it explicit. But it's really an edge case, and actually, I think it can be implemented without that limit. So, how many of you know aliases and anchors in YAML? Okay, so they can come in quite handy. You maybe you don't need them often, but they're actually easy to understand, I hope. They're simply like references in Perl. So let's imagine we write an API, a REST API, and we want to return the list of comments for a pull request on GitHub, for example. So we have a user object here, actually two. And here we have the list of comments. And here we have a reference to the user. So, and this is a comment from the same user, so we have the same reference here. So how does it look like if we return it in JSON? We have the user object here, and we have it here, and it's a copy of that. If you load that back into Perl, you get two different objects. In YAML, you have an anchor that's within the ampersand and the name of the anchor. And this refers to this mapping down here. And later, we can use this with the star and the name of the anchor. You can actually use names, but if it's generated from Perl, it will just use numbers. So if you load that back into Perl, you will get back the same data structure as before. So you have only one user object. So that's quite nice and can save some data. And you also can write config files like that. If you have the same data and you want to use it in several places, you just use aliases, and if you change it at one place, it gets changed everywhere. So they are a nice feature for serialization, and you can even serialize cyclic data structures, graphs, or anything. What else can be useful for serialization? Any ideas what we would want to serialize? So in YAML you have tags. Every node can have a tag, like an alias or an anchor. In Perl you have classes and data types, and in YAML you have tags. And when loading a YAML file, you have to have a schema to resolve the tags into classes and data types. So there are some standard tags actually. The following documents are actually equal. So this is a standard tag for a sequence. This is for a mapping, null, boolean, integer, string. And these are actually default because it's just YAML knows it from what it gets. If it gets the string null, which is not in quotes, it will be a null. Or if it gets true and false, not in quotes, it will resolve as a boolean. Same for integers. So you can just leave off these tags and you will, yeah?
So null and tilde are the same?
Yes, they're actually the same in YAML 1.1. In YAML 1.2, the tilde is actually part of another schema. So in YAML 1.2, you can choose between 3 different schemas. But in YAML 1.1, they're the same, yeah. Also the empty string. If you leave the node off and empty, it will also resolve to null. And you have generic object tags for every language. So here we have Ruby example, here we have a Perl example, and another Perl example. This has 2 exclamation marks and this is only 1. Here is a Python example. So these all will resolve to an object of the class dice with 2 numbers in it. So this way you can serialize just about any object you have in Perl. You can serialize regex objects. Actually, you can serialize code code references. And then you also have local tags. And in Perl loaders, they are also loaded into classes. A local tag is just 1 exclamation mark and then just a name. And I'm not sure. I think YAML PM doesn't do that. That shouldn't be here. Only YAML XS and YAML SYK do this. So this will also be loaded into a class, into an object of the class dice. The problem is you cannot turn it off. You just go with it, and if you load YAML from an untrusted source, you have a security hole. So that's bad, but we are going to fix that. So you can use YAML for config files, serializing just about any data. You can also use it for debugging Perl objects instead of just data dumper, for example. You can use it for data, for testing, for AP specifications, data exchange. So we have the Perl YAML processors, and all behave a little bit different. So we have YAML PM, we have YAML SYK, YAML XS, YAML Tiny, and we have YAML PP now also. And let's start with the Booleans I was talking about before. So most JSON processors actually have Boolean support. If you load that in a JSON processor, you will get a JSON PP Boolean object, which is, in Perl you have just 1 and the empty string, or 1 and 0. Why do you need Booleans? Well, because if you want to write the JSON out again, you want to keep the Booleans, because other languages actually have Booleans. Or if you want to validate it against the schema, if you write an API, you actually want to keep Booleans and not just have 1 and 0. So do we have that in YAML? So do you know what YAML PM does with the string true and false? Anyone? It doesn't know anything about Booleans. Also YAML Tiny doesn't know anything. What about YAML SYK? Does it recognize them? Yes, it does. It does the 1 and the empty string. What about YAML XS? So since version 0.67, it actually supports YAML PP Boolean object. So I implemented this last month. And you can choose between Boolean PM actually and JSON PP. So if you prefer Boolean PM, you can use this. And JSON PP also supports this. So yeah, I'm not sure about YAML PM, if this will get fixed. So some notes about YAML PM. It was really the first YAML module ever. It's based on YAML 1.0. And 1.0 is really, really different from 1.1 actually. It has a lot of problems with 1.1 and 1.2 syntax. It cannot parse trailing comments. Actually, I have a patch for that, but it needs to be optional because people rely on the trailing comments being part of their content. If the behavior would change, I would break a lot of code. It cannot parse nested sequences on one line, so you can actually have a dash and a dash in the same line. And also zero indented sequences are not supported. So you don't have to indent a sequence actually. You can just use a zero indented sequence. YAML XS does that, but actually all YAML processors support that except YAML PM. It also cannot do multi-line quoted strings. It doesn't know Booleans. Has problems with block scalars and some more stuff. So yeah, be careful if you use it. But it also has some good news. It has several options. So since I don't remember the version number, but it's pretty new, you can preserve the key order when loading YAML. So if you load the YAML and dump it back, you will get the same key order. That's actually a nice feature. And the other YAML processors don't have this. You have an indent option. You specify how many spaces should be used when dumping. You can have sorted keys. You can serialize code. And you actually have to use the YAML numify option. Otherwise, integers will be just loaded as strings. And yeah, it has some more options. So that's actually nice. It's just that it has problems with the syntax. YAML XS is based on libyaml. libyaml implements 1.1. And it diverges from the spec in some cases, but actually these cases are really rare. You shouldn't have problems with it actually. So for most YAML XS will just work. So it's really recommended to use this one. Only true and false are recognized as Booleans. The YAML 1.1 spec actually says no, yes, N, Y, and a lot of other things that should be recognized as Booleans. YAML XS does only one, but I think that's actually a good choice. And it can do Boolean objects now, but it doesn't have many options. It can serialize code when dumping, but it cannot load it back yet. And the mapping keys are just sorted by default when dumping. YAML Seq is based on libseq. This implements YAML 1.0. So it can parse a bit more than YAML PM. But it also has problems. And it also can segfault. It has sort keys option, single quote option, and you also can load and dump code. And it has some more options. YAML Tiny is just a small subset of YAML. You don't have any aliases or anchors or tags. You also don't have Booleans, no multi-line quoted strings, but it's really fast. So if you have simple YAML, you can just go with it. For example, yeah, I mean, you could use YAML XS because it's fast, but sometimes you cannot use XS modules. My cell phone actually tells me that my time is over.
You have 25 minutes or 20?
No.
20. I apologize, I thought it was 25. Yes, you're on 20 minutes.
How much?
It's half an hour. Five.
5 minutes, okay. Great. So YAML Tiny. So YAML PP is a new module, and I started this at New Year's Day this year. It still cannot parse 1.2 yet, but I'm working on it. It already parses more test cases than all other Perl YAML loaders. All the highlighted YAML you saw in this talk is highlighted by YAML PP. And I'll actually show you more about this in my lightning talk, how it works and what I actually want to do with it. Some notes about the YAML test suite. So maybe you have been wondering, is there actually a test suite for all the YAML test cases? Or does every framework and in every language implement its own test suite? And so in 2016, Ingi started the YAML test suite. It has at the moment 270 something test cases in a language agnostic format. And it aims at YAML 1.2 and at some point maybe 1.3. So we are working on 1.3 actually. And we want future parsers to all behave the same way because this is just a mess. And so to show you the test suite, you may have a look at the test matrix. So when I started to write YAML PP, I actually wanted to know how my code performs and how other frameworks perform with the tests from the test suite. And actually there's a nice Docker image. It's in Ingi's YAML editor, which has 16 different YAML frameworks. So you just have to install the Docker image. And then I ran the tests from it, and I created this matrix. And these are the frameworks that can generate event format. So these are parsers that create events, and from the events, actually the data is constructed. So there's libyaml, pyaml, for example, and also YAML PP can also do this. And it's looking actually not bad. So 23 more tests I have to actually get passing. And these are the frameworks that can load YAML and they dump it back in JSON. So we compare the JSON output to the expected output. So yeah, it looks like a big mess, but it's actually not that bad because we have a lot of edge cases in the test suite, of course. So, and we also compare the invalid YAML documents. And there's another page where you can actually browse through all the test cases. And there's just 270 more coming. And click on each test to see what the actual framework returns. So that's really nice. So if you have problems with one YAML processor, you can look at this. I know it's huge, but it can be helpful, I guess. And oh, okay. So are there any questions?
Perfect timing.
Well,
Perfect timing.
so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.